I'm going to dedicate this to all the women that didn't make it out, to the mothers who were loving and smart and creative, but captured, and so they were unable to show like we wanted them to show. I know that there's pain coming up from that situation that gets unresolved. And I just want to describe this little story. I want to bring you into what it might be like to walk in their shoes. Normally, she wouldn't give her life a second thought. And let us not forget child sexual abuse and the rampantness of that. She moved through the days and stumbled through the nights as told. Every day and each night, her greatest goal not to become the source of his rage. So there she was, getting dressed to go out into the brutally cold New Year's Eve night. She used to hope he would do more than what her self-hatred required, that he would notice the tiny fire that sat just behind her right knee, hidden to any but the most astute observer. That fire represented the remnants of her 7-year-old self. She had grabbed what she could when the monsters came, but her hands were small and shaking, and she didn't know what was truly necessary. So she took what was closest to her heart, her imagination and her words. She balled them up the way she did her math tests and crammed them into the secret space. In her mind's eye, it was just behind her right knee, stuffed into its crevice across from her rage. As she prepared to dress for the last night of the year, she thought about the secret hiding place, and for a moment she felt a strong urge to reach for it. 20 years had passed since she placed it there, and the thought of going out into the bitter cold to barter with strangers yet again seemed to be extraordinarily hard on this night. He hadn't asked her to do this. He had pressed his fist into her chest and told her this was her new job until times got better. But she knew better times would never come. She knew she had already had her share of better times, and they ended when she was 8, never to return. As she made her way down the stairs of the hotel that accepted guests at 4, 8, or 24-hour intervals, it became clear to her when he looked at her, all he saw was a heartbeat and a vagina. Nothing more. This was the 4th time she had been forced to walk the streets to earn his living. Although she was smart and creative and kind and thoughtful, she was also deeply wounded, blind from the inside out. She couldn't see her own beauty, power, or strength. When she walked, she looked at within. All she saw was empty rooms down a dark corridor, and each time she attempted to reach for a door, it was slammed shut just as she touched the knob. It's New Year's Eve. The streets were alive with people rushing about wearing festive expressions and flashy outfits. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. She looked with longing at their confident displays of self-knowledge. The wind whipped her face and raced through her thin coat and up her skirt and into her bones, but she kept walking and waving at the passing cars. By 11 p.m., she had only managed 2 blowjobs, and after buying herself a coffee, a pint of Canadian Club, and a glass tube with a lighter, there was just $34.58 left to show for her trouble. Fortified by hot coffee and cheap liquor, she set off down the main street, waving and woo-hooing all the way. She jumped out of the last car barefoot while it was still running. Her nose and right side was bleeding. She had to leave her shoes behind, one in the white van with tinted windows and a temporary license plate, and the other that was thrown at the back of her head as she ran away. It would later be picked up by a young girl passing by who imagined herself one day wearing shoes like that when she grew up. In her mind's eye, she was startled to see an adult self that was not her, but instead an older version of the woman she saw running away, Frightened, she threw the shoe on the curb and ran to catch up with her family. After pausing to lean against a laundromat window and being told to move, she directed her exhausted, bleeding, and triggered body towards a street she used to frequent in order to purchase some relief. She knew she didn't have enough money to return home, and she was in no condition to continue to work the street. There will be more blood tonight, she thought, and in a flash her future was decided. She patted the lighter and glass tube in the crossbody purse she wore underneath her sweater. She stopped at the corner to turn over the dirty blood-stained money to the indifferent dealer and made her way to her sanctuary. Halfway down the street, there were two majestic, abandoned gray stone mansions. It was said they had once been owned by a famous movie star, although no one knew for sure or cared. It was the gangway between the mansions that she called the sanctuary. There was an alcove on the side where a rusted wrought iron park garden bench sat flush against the building and out of the direct path of the wind. It was close enough to the front of the house that the streetlight cast a golden glow into the space, and a broken, winged concrete angel leaned haphazardly against the structure and faced the bench. She had been down before. Her life had been a series of bad breaks and setbacks that would have broken most long before this moment. But she was a sponge that sat on that park bench, bloody, raped, and nearly frozen. She sought for, as long as the bag would last, a reprieve. She broke a piece of the chunk from the crack, nestled it just inside the pipe on a small bed of copper scouring pads. She held her lighter up to the poison and began to pull the smoke through the tube into her lungs and brain. As she exhaled, a wave of forgetfulness flowed through her entire body. She sank down gracefully onto the rusted wrought iron bench with her eyes fixated on the angel, and she began to fantasize. She was a little girl in footy pajamas, getting her hair brushed and combed by a loving woman who sang to her as she made long sweeping strokes with the brush and applied sweet-smelling oils to her scalp. She felt loved, safe, and secure, sitting on a pillow with her arms draped over the woman's legs. Tears of longing rolled down her face, and she hit the pipe again and lapsed back into her dream world. When she returned to consciousness, she found blood rolling down her side, forming an ever-increasing pool in the snow. Her bare feet were numb and showing signs of frostbite. She thought of the men she had denied the opportunity to witness the end of her life. They were angry men who could find no release for their madness and pain except in the soft bodies of wounded women. Their distorted need for power and control was thwarted in the daylight world, so they sought release in the screams of the women they hunted. Finding none, they sought to silence them and leave the blame with the body. She took a long drink from the Canadian club, put more crack on the pipe, and took another. This time she was 19, nearly 6 feet tall, with smooth, flawless brown skin and a certainty of purpose. She was in New York City to meet with an agent who had seen her walking past Marshall Fields in Chicago and given her a card and an invitation to model for Essence magazine. As she reached out to shake hands on their agreement, the bottle of Canadian Club slipped from her lap and fell to the ground. Startled back to reality, she bent over to pick it up, fell to the ground, and decided to stay there. She took another deep swallow, curled up into the fetal position, staring at the face of the broken-winged angel. She can't see her detail. She stares, but can barely see. Snow had begun to fall softly, and as it passed the streetlight, it sparkled briefly like diamonds. She took another hit, exhaled, and then seized the form of a woman in a white evening gown, forming out of the billowing smoke. The woman radiates a golden glow as she moves toward our girl, holding out her arms. She speaks melodically in an ancient voice that echoes and seems to come from every direction. Come now, the bells will be ringing soon, and you'll want to be home for the new year. She nodded her head and opened her eyes to see a beautiful woman with ebony skin lovingly embracing her and and as she wrapped her arms around that long and graceful neck, she also brushed against her wings. Immediately, she felt the pain and the cold melt away. She looked for the broken-winged statue, but it was gone. She looked into the eyes of the ethereal woman, sighed deeply, and relinquished herself to the mystery. Together they rose from the earth, passing the diamonds sparkling in the streetlights, passing the snow, the clouds, the moon, and onward beyond the stars. The next morning, a real estate developer looking to purchase the mansions found her in the fetal position with a near empty bottle of Canadian Club and the crack pipe beside her. He wanted to be disgusted, but could only feel envy when he looked at her face. He would tell the ambulance driver that morning and others for all of his remaining years about this young woman who should have elicited pity and disgust, but had instead brought him to sacred tears. She looked radiant and serene, like a woman who had been received by the divine. Every New Year's Day until his death, he would write a large check and donate it to the women's shelter and residential treatment center he developed from those 2 abandoned gray stone mansions with an alcove in the gangway. So the next time you see a woman on the street that's struggling, show her some love with nothing but your eyes, and nod your head and smile. Sometimes that's all it takes.